Welcome to Generations. Kevin Swanson with you, and more on Brave New Science today. I'm very interested in saving science. That's my background, Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering. In fact, I'm writing a book on science right now. About 2.4% of all U.S. babies are now born through assisted reproductive technology, primarily in vitro fertilization. That's about 1 in every 40 to 45 births. There are more than 500 fertility clinics reporting data to the CDC each year, and 1 to 1.5 million frozen embryos out there somewhere. Here is just one more hideous account from this brave new world in which a surrogate mother, a hired womb, usually for homosexuals, was required by her child's commissioning parents to abort the child. Here's why: because an ultrasound had revealed the baby was missing 2 fingers. This is LifeSite News. Now listen to this from Olivia Morel, author and activist who herself was born via surrogacy and now fights against it. The wretchedness of this whole business of surrogacy and IVF is beyond our abilities to comprehend or to express it. Hired wombs, forced abortions, IVF with its abortion rate of 7 to 20 babies per child conceived, 100,000 babies born a year by IVF. But what a cost. What a cost. Live Action estimates that 1.9 million embryos did not survive implantation in 2023, and 1.759 million embryos were either frozen, destroyed, donated to research, or released for embryo adoption. That's a cost, huge cost. Kill off that many babies to salvage a few live ones, and now 60,000 babies have been bred and bought by homosexuals. Roughly 30% of the surrogacy rent-a-womb business. And keep in mind, the Mark Regnerus study found that sexual abuse occurs 3 to 4 times more frequently in homosexual families than typical families with moms and dads. And only 9% of Americans morally oppose this hideous business. But now also, renting wombs and buying babies is one of the sickest, most depraved elements of human society today. It's a global trade set to be worth $200 billion worldwide by 2034. And the U.S. is the world leader in international surrogacy. It's been shut down in India and Vietnam. And recent scandals showing the factory farming of women in Ukraine and the former Soviet nation of Georgia have seen international baby buyers flock into the U.S. Surrogacy is the national shame of this country. It's permitted in all but one state, Louisiana. No federal laws regulating an industry that has been described as legalized human trafficking. Surrogacy should be a crime, my friends. There are baby trafficking cases under the cover of commercial surrogacy now being investigated by the FBI in the United States. For 30 years, the U.S. has been the go-to destination for LGBTQ parents since 1995, whether single men, couples, thruples, quadruples, whatever, to buy the babies for whatever they're going to do to those babies. It's a brave new world out there. It's messed up beyond all recognition. But here's my question. How does a Christian interact with a mubar? Solomon suggested cutting the baby in 2 for the 2 prostitutes arguing over the baby. It was obviously a mubar situation, messed up beyond all recognition. But what do we do with 1.2 million babies in cold storage? Do we pay $15,000 and just keep the industry going by impregnating our daughters, our wives, et cetera, with these little ones? Do we wait for mechanical wombs to develop? Do we vote for Trump? We need a Solomon-like wisdom to work the mubar on this one for sure. Fundamentally, without the fear of God before their eyes in the university science classrooms, no fear of God before their eyes in the corporate biological laboratories and the hospitals, anything goes. Anything can happen. Without the fear of God and science, I don't know what's going to happen next. So, folks, here's my introduction to my new book on science in the fear of God. Okay, this is the way I put it. Here is a short and simple survey of science for the everyday reader, whether that be a 13-year-old junior high student or 33-year-old adult working in and out of a scientific field. I make no bones about it without apology. I say my intention with this work is to save science. I wish to return science to the category of God's science, in the fear of God. I call it God's science because all science comes from the Latin word for knowledge. All knowledge is God's knowledge, and therefore all science must be God's science. The fear of God is the beginning of all knowledge. And this certainly extends to the study of the natural world, that is, God's creation, the work of his hands, the demonstration of his praiseworthy attributes of wisdom, power, and goodness. This was the testimony of virtually every science in the Western world until Charles Darwin. They used to fear God. They expressed a deep reverence for God in their diaries, their letters, last wills and testaments. This all disappeared with the advent of Darwin's evolutionary hypotheses. Hardly any scientist admits to fearing God anymore. Pew Research found 99% of all working scientists with PhD degrees hold to Darwinian presuppositions. The same can be said for 99% of universities that teach science, 99% of museums that promote science at this time. The situation is extremely grave. Science and technology produced without the fear of God will only produce untold devastation in this brave new world without God. What will scientists who do not fear God do with genetic engineering, weapons of mass destruction, biological laboratories, artificial intelligence, developed designer viruses and bacteria, not to mention IVF and surrogacy? What destruction will their inventions bring to the character of the people, integrity and balance needed in the human psyche, and relationships that hold human society together? What will politicians who do not fear God do with technology designed by scientists who do not fear God? Anybody holding to a biblical view of human nature would shudder to think of the consequences coming about by such a horrific scenario. Saving science must also involve saving the world. And Christians who fear God in the scientific field may be the only common grace left and the only salt left to preserve the world in this modern age. Every Christian must be very clear and astute on this subject concerning the definition of science, the limitations of science, the purpose of science, and the difference between fake science and real science. The time is right for the release of this short introduction to real science. After 175 years of Charles Darwin's doubt and this long and painful sequence of nothing but failure to substantiate his far-fetched hypothesis, belief in evolution becomes increasingly unscientific, irrational, and even insane. Increasing the human base of knowledge about the universe has only magnified our only understanding of the complexity of living organisms and everything else by a millionfold. The utter impossibility of molecules to man evolution by a chance mechanism is more obvious to the rational person than ever before. The conspicuous absence of meaningful evidence or any proven mechanism for the evolution of the species further exasperates the case. The modern scientific community appear more like a 15th century assembly of alchemists or a muddle of primitive witch doctors. Modern science has finally come to a crisis point. The magnitude of the crisis is only accentuated by the universal acceptance of the unsubstantiated hypothesis by far and away the majority of modern institutions in media, academia, and government. Abandoning God and the fear of God will not bode well for the future of any of these institutions. The only resolution to this is to build back the foundations of the fear of God and science and all knowledge, one student at a time, one teacher at a time, one parent at a time, and one homeschool family at a time. I am convinced that this is the only human factor that will save the world in the 21st century. That's my introduction to my new book on saving science today. Brave New Science and the Brave New World with the IVF Revolution with Joshua Holler. He's the author of a new book called Misconceiving IVF, an essential guide to the perils of in vitro fertilization. And folks, the IVF issue has really hit the headlines. It's bigger than it's ever been. At this point, 12 million babies have been born since 1978 by IVF, so it's a big deal. My stats say 2 to 3% of babies born in the U.S. last year born by in vitro fertilization. And President Donald Trump, Senator Ted Cruz, others have spoken out on enthusiastic support for this practice. And joining me today to talk about it, Joshua Holler. He's author of the new book, Misconceiving IVF, an essential guide to the perils of in vitro fertilization. He's pastor of First Baptist over at St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome to the program, Josh. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit of your story of how you got to this position where you really felt like you needed to throw a flag on the play. I guess I could put it that way. You kind of threw a flag on the play in your book, In Vitro Fertilization, Misconceiving IVF. So how did you get to that point?
Sure. Well, I think it began many years ago. I've been passionately pro-life for many years, as long as I can remember, as long ago as watching the Charlton Heston documentary on the Silent Scream.
I remember that. Yeah, I watched that as well. I mean, I'm talking like 83, 84 something. Yeah.
I think
Bernard Nathanson, all those 90s. Guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, grew up, in a Christian home and listening to resources from Focus on the Family, and those things just saturated my being, and that was just in my bones. Mm-hmm. And when I left home and when I first got majorly involved in pro-life issues is after I left active duty and went into college. And I think my first major group assignment was, what do we do about pro-life issues, that Roe v. Wade. So this is 2011. Well, not what we do about Roe v. Wade, but just how does the church respond to abortion? Yeah. And I think that's when I first got involved with sidewalk counseling. It happened to be a 40 Days for Life was going on. We saw people outside of a Planned Parenthood off of Roosevelt Boulevard, I think it is, in Chicago. And we just hopped out and we're like, hey, what's going on? and so this was something that I was deeply involved with, even in seminary. And I joined an organization called Churches for Life, which was born out of the PCA, actually, Presbyterian Church of America. Okay. And they did a lot of resource creation for them, as well as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And they're a parachurch organization that worked to create what was called life teams that would, what they would try to do is create resources and be gospel-driven champions of life within local churches and cultivate that. So to promote that within the church and mobilize the church. And I loved that. And at the time, there was a pastor here in St. Louis, and I had been doing sidewalk counseling even at the abortion clinic here, preaching the gospel, that sort of thing. And there was a pastor here in St. Louis who had pursued IVF for his kids, and I wasn't really aware of what that meant, but I wanted to know more. So I got I don't think it was Zoom, I think it was Skype back in the day, a call with him, and he was somebody who was going to be a prospective board member for Churches for Life. And I just picked his brain. I just asked him, tell me about it. And he told me about the process of ICSI, where you take one sperm, one egg, one embryo, and here's how to do it ethically. And at the time, I thought, this seems okay. This seems pro-life. What could be more pro-life than wanting to have kids and have babies and overcome infertility. And I didn't see what the issue was. And that was around 2017. Okay. Fast forward 3 years later, I'm in my ethics doctoral program, which because it was during COVID, it was held via Zoom. And I was assigned in this bioethics seminar, the paper, the question was, what do we do with leftover embryos? And it was when I was assigned that question is when my eyes were open to the atrocities that are done to so many embryos in the name of overcoming infertility. Wow. And we can get into just so much of that. And I talk about this a little bit in the beginning. Go ahead, you can jump in.
Yeah, let me back up for just a second, Josh. And what is it? Yeah, I think my journey is actually fairly similar to that. I started with the Silent Scream in the 1980s. That's how I got involved in Coalition for American Pro-Life University Students on the campus of California Polytechnic State University way back when. And then, pro-life candidate for governor here in the state of Colorado, and just, pro-life. And, IVF sounds all right, whatever. But you dig into it. And I think it seems to me that Christians need to get, educated on these things. We've got to dig into stuff. Is that a lesson learned?
100%. I mean, once you increase your knowledge on any given subject, you're going to expose yourself to the truth.
Yeah.
And once you expose yourself to the truth, you got to afflict the conscience rightly in order to get yourself involved with this. So much of what happens around IVF, even up to the policy level, is done and born out of ignorance. To just to name something, the inconsistency that the Republican Party has in the pro-life position with IVF.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Big time. And I think digging in a little bit more, knocking the watermelon. I like to say that. My wife and I talk about that. You got to knock the watermelon a few times. You got to dig into this a little bit. Just, and I think we need to be careful. We can't be trusting everything the world gives us. I mean, if that may be a movie, or that may be a worldview that's being expressed in a science class or whatever. You just can't take what the world is giving you hook, line, and sinker. I think that's lesson learned. But let's take this apart a little bit. Now, let me give you some stats that come from. This is from an organization called Life Action, and they looked at these charts from the IVF company Alife. This is a company that does IVF, okay, and they've got this chart where they talk about, an average of 10 to 12 embryos created per IVF cycle, but anywhere from 7 embryos up to as many as 17 per cycle are created using a conservative 9 embryos, that's the average number, at 432,641 cycles. That totals about 3.9 million embryos created total via IVF. In 1 year, yet only 95,860 babies were born that year. So Live Action Group recently estimated that 1,947,000 embryos did not survive implantation in 2023, and 1,759,000 other embryos were either frozen, destroyed, donated to research, or released for embryo adoption. Not sure which category, but a total of 3.9 million embryos to produce about 96,000 babies. Something wrong with that? Is something wrong with that? That was your take?
Yeah, there's something majorly wrong with that. Yeah, there's if you were to present that before somebody, like we will overcome infertility and give you a child, but it's going to take 10 kids in order to do that, and we will keep the other 9 kids, and you can have the one. Nobody would take that scenario.
Yeah, that just sounds wrong.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, and especially the parents thinking, those are my kids. Those are my kids. And some of them are going to die. A fair percentage of them are going to die in the process. And it depends on the age as well. Go through the science just for a moment, if you've got it off the top of your head.
Sure. Well, IVF from the beginning, what we're doing, in vitro fertilization literally means it's in glass or a petri dish, and that's what it's conception in a glass, or the original terminology for it was a test tube baby, and what we're taking is a sperm and an egg, joining them together outside of the womb to conceive, and joining those two together. The process has gotten better. And so they do things like ICSIs, where you directly inject one sperm into an egg to create an embryo. An embryo, it's not a euphemism, it's a technical term, but it is a human life. Mm-hmm. This is a member of the species Homo sapien. Mm-hmm. This is a little image bearer. This is somebody made in the image of God. This is a who, not a what. Mm-hmm. And passing the SLED test, size, level, development, environment, degree dependency, all that. They're just in a different location, right? Yeah. All those things, and what happens is they have to make a lot of embryos. And after they make lots of embryos, they have to then go through a literal grading process. There's an A through F, and there's like AA, BB, and so forth. You can Google image this, and the grading process is done off of morphology and how they look for the embryologist, the technician, and then they can be tested, things for cystic fibrosis or spinal bifida, and or even gender. Do you want a boy? Do you want a girl? This is eugenics 2.0. It's alive and well today. Wow. And when you get down to maybe you started off with maybe 16, and now you're down to 8. Then you get to your 8, and these are your 8 viable, put scare quotes around that, your best looking best likelihood likely embryos to then transfer. Those are the ones that they're going to freeze and use for transferring and implantation. That's what happens. Now, in order to, I skipped a couple steps to get there. In order to harvest the eggs, the woman is put on a series of hormones and drugs, which can lead to things like ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Okay. And normally a woman's only supposed to produce one egg a month, and then suddenly she's going to be producing something like 10. Now, it's not supposed to happen, not naturally. Right. The sperm is obviously it's collected much easier, but usually through something like masturbation, which is already morally problematic in its own ways. And when those then skipping forward to then you have your 8 embryos to then transfer. What happens to once you get one that's transferred and you get an implantation and a birth, and you have several leftover embryos? Now we have
and the leftovers have not been implanted yet. Is that right? So the leftovers have not been implanted at this point.
At that point, yeah. So let's say somebody has as many as we'll go the number 6. They had one that made it, and they have a live birth. They have their dream child, but they have 6 leftover embryos. What do we do with the leftover embryos now? Well, they can be left over in storage indefinitely, which just happens to a lot of them. And there's some debate about what the number is. Could be as little as 1 million, could be as much as 10 million. This highlights a major despair, so problem.
We don't even know this.
It's not regulated.
Yeah, we don't even know this. I mean, I think my numbers off of Google, that was 1 to 1.2 million out there somewhere, but it could be more than that. And something I didn't realize, this was in your book, people have to pay for the storage. It costs money to store these babies.
They do, yeah.
How much?
Depends. It depends, but you can see how this incentivizes some places for to make more embryos for more storage.
I know it's
embryos
scary.
don't take up hardly any space. Mm-hmm. They're stored in these little straws. But you should think about how quickly these little people can die if there's a fluctuation in the power. Yeah. If the like what happened in Alabama, where a person inadvertently wandered into a section of the hospital, which was a fertility clinic, wandered as a mentally disabled person, wandered in, and then it was liquid nitrogen. It's very cold, and they burned their hand. They dropped the embryos, and they just killed a bunch of kids.
Oh no!
There's been a power fluctuation before, and there was as many as 1,000 children just died overnight.
Oh no!
There's a lot of these fertility clinics in California. What happens if there's an earthquake? We could be looking at a mass genocide just because of natural disasters, because of all these kids that are indefinitely just frozen and regarded as property.
Wow. That's just, as you hear this, you go, this is messed up. Let's go on, though, to the problem of complicity. What is that? What's the problem of complicity, for the average person considering IVF as an option?
Well, complicity is your willful involvement in in just an ethics, your involvement for crime. Yeah. I think an example I gave that's just simple. You're a getaway driver at a bank robbery. Mm-hmm. You may not be the one that goes in there and holds the gun, but you drove away. You're complicit in the crime. Well, how does something like complicity? What are the elements that make one complicit or not complicit in a moral action? And there's 3 pairs of stuff. Let's see if I can remember them off the top of my head. But the scope and seriousness of a kind of action. So the scope is like how big is it? Mm-hmm. Like how widespread? The seriousness here, when we're talking about here millions, the seriousness that we're talking about life and death, literally. Yeah. Then the other elements are knowledge, intent, and then as well as time and proximity. Knowledge and intent are things like, do you know what's taking place and what are you actually intending to do? Well, the time and proximity are referring to like how long ago did this action take place? So an example I use in the book is some people like I live not that far away from Bayer headquarters, and some people are aware of, like in World War II, Bayer was involved with the creation of the gas that killed Jews, and they're like, well, we can't. Are you saying that I can't buy Bayer aspirin because that somehow makes me complicit in the destruction of Jews? Well, no, not at all. There's a huge discontinuity between who worked for Bayer then and now. That not only knowledge, intent, and as well as the time and proximity then. But when we come to an issue like IVF, here's the key thing is that not only maybe we're not dealing with the same doctors from the 1980s, like after Marie, the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, she was born in 1978. But we're building off the knowledge of hundreds of thousands, millions that have been killed and destroyed. And the IVF technicians, the embryologists, those that are working at these fertility clinics know what's going on. They know that these are indeed these little embryos are humans. They know 100% what is taking place. I have more sympathy that the couple going in might not be 100% aware of every step along the way of what happens to their embryos. And oftentimes they're being deceived. This has happened in multiple cases. But when we increase our knowledge of the fact of what is taking place, we are participating in this major industry that frequently sells itself on being highly successful at the destruction of human lives. And so the moral speed bump I want to throw in front of people is we need to consider whether even participating in this is making us complicit and making our hands dirty of this, at least morally speaking.
You know, Justin, I want to come back around quickly on this and say, you know what, there's a lot of things that happen in life where now that I'm aware of this, how do I shift direction on that? I mean, there may be families who've, supported this and gotten involved in this through the years. But now, we're getting educated. We're realizing, man, we live in a brave new world, and I participate somewhat in this. But now I want to set a new direction. And, it's not to say we live lives of regret. And this is one thing I do not want. I don't want families living lives of regret. But I do want to live lives of renewal and repentance and reformation and, doing things God's ways. And, there are a lot of people involved in abortion industry in the past have become some of the most amazing pro-lifers. I mean, you think of Bernard Nathanson, one of the amazing, beginnings of all of the pro-life stuff in the 1980s. I guess I just want to encourage families to say, you know what? Can we now set a new direction? Can we begin to say, we're going to save lives? We're going to do everything we can to save lives in the future. I guess that's the right response, right, Josh? I mean, for all of us, for me and you.
That's right. Yeah, I think repentance, I believe repentance must always be accompanied by restructuring. You see this as a profound theme in the Old Testament, right? When Josiah, when they get into the temple and they discover the scrolls and they read them, they're like, oh my goodness, we haven't been doing any of these things. It's accompanied by this major restructuring throughout the land that we must come into conformity with God's law, God's ways, God's word, and so forth. We need to do the same thing today. We need to repent, and we do that when we come into the knowledge of the truth. And when it comes to this, we need just to realize these are little human beings that are being destroyed regularly, routinely, and in full knowledge of a lot of people. And you'd be surprised at how many times people have been pushed through the IVF process and they come out the backside of it. They don't regret having their kids. They don't say, we don't wish our kids didn't exist, but they said, we wish we hadn't pursued IVF. And there's a podcast, a gal named Kelly Fell, who was one of my endorsements of the book, Center for Bioethics and Culture. I might be misquoting her credentials there. But her podcast, she has couples on that are frequently say the same thing, that we were pressured, do IVF, and they overlook things like restorative reproductive medicine, some very basic things to help heal the body naturally, and do many of these things, because infertility is often just a symptom of many things that are already wrong and disordered within a person's body. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that need to happen. And one of them is we need to expose the truth.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And thanks for doing that with the book. I want to throw this at you, and I hope it's not a curveball here, but I've been thinking about this for a while myself, and this is an example that comes to me, partially because I'm a student of history, and I've done a ton of work on the history of the missionary movement around the world over the last, actually 2,000 years, as in taking the world for Jesus. And one of the examples that I came upon, I think this is Arnott in the Congo. And we're talking about, well before Livingstone, Arnott's out there in the Congo. So good stuff happening with these missionaries, the early missionaries in Africa. And he ran into the guys who are kidnapping and enslaving, the Muslim slave trade, right? So you run into this in the 1830s or 40s. And now, suppose the kidnapping business or the slavery business is legalized. And apparently it was, I don't know whether it's completely legal in all these nations, but that was the kind of thing they were doing. And so what they would do is they would sell the kids off to the missionaries and sometimes even threaten to kill their kidnapped kids if they were not, bought and paid for by the missionaries. But again, there was a business involved here. And so they would kidnap and sell these kids to the Christian missionaries. And thankfully, it was guys like Livingstone who stood up and said, actually, we're shutting the whole industry down. It's like, we're not going to play this. And what would happen is you get this push-pull thing going where the more the missionaries played the game, the more the slave traders would engage. And so to what extent do Christians say, we're pulling back from the industry, and we're going to do the best we can to shut this thing down? I sort of like what David Livingstone did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess is to ask a question, to clarify your question. Are you asking if we Christians get more involved with embryo adoption, will that inadvertently just cause the industry to just ramp up the creation of embryos?
On either side of it, whether participating in the IVF itself or get involved in IVF adoption, I don't know how much Christians should be involved in the business versus trying to shut the thing down. There's a tension, there's ethical tension on this. I'm sure you've grappled with that yourself, but.
Yeah, I think the way that we bring IVF to a halt isn't through regulation. And you'll see that the policymakers, the policy analysts, they want regulation, which certainly it's terrible that it's unregulated. And there's so many stats we don't know. Like you were citing that group at the beginning is making estimates. They're making estimates because there's a lot of stuff that this is the Wild West of ART, assisted reproductive technology, that they're just not required to report. So it's best scenario, best case estimations. To use a historical example that I used in the book, Upton Sinclair, when he wrote the book The Jungle, which is in the turn of the century, 1900s, he wrote a series of articles that was aimed at describing just the horrific conditions of refugees that were coming, immigrants coming through the Rust Belt cities like Chicago and so forth, and just how terrible the food industry was, and how they were being preyed upon. And his big answer was probably even worse than the problem was at the time, which was socialism. He thought socialism was going to be the big thing that was going to solve all their problems. And after the fact, the big thing that did result out of his book was things like the formation of what later became the FDA, the Food Drug Administration. Teddy Roosevelt one morning was reading his newspaper, eating sausage, when he heard about a man who fell into a meat grinder and was turned into sausage. And that led to the passage of the creation of this of the FDA. Upton Sinclair then later wrote, I aimed, to paraphrase, if I might misquote it, I aimed for America's heart and I hit them in the stomach. I think when it comes to IVF, I fear the direction that people, policy analysts and so forth, are looking at is that this is just industry run amok, and we just need to regulate it.
Yeah.
And really what we need to be looking at is what has God already provided in his world, in how we're supposed to have babies, and look at the beauty and creation of having big families of lots of babies, and also the alternative means for having babies for those who are childless and cannot conceive. And he gives us a beautiful picture of that in this thing called adoption.
Yeah, it is.
And
absolutely.
it just so happens that this is an analogous picture of the gospel. I'm not saying when you adopt somebody, that is the gospel. I got accused of that, actually. Somebody saying, you're saying this is the gospel. No, I'm not.
It's just the picture of what God does for us, really.
That's right, 100%. Yeah. And this is something the church has been charged with in caring for the orphans and widows.
That's right.
Now, not everybody's being told they should adopt, but God's calling somebody to do it.
Yeah.
And we're not supposed to poo-poo on that and just say just adopt. This is not simple. This is not easy. This is a high calling, and there's a lot of orphans out there that need to be taken care of. And I think when the church does what the church is supposed to do with this beautiful picture of the family, big families, roaring families, the teeming with life, that the idea of even wanting to go to IVF is going to shrivel up and die.
And we begin to see the true redemption of this entire thing through the Christian family, and we hope to see that more and more. Let me ask you about the one flesh union chapter. You've got this other moral issue with IVF. It's the one flesh union, and it's been a question mark in my mind for a long time. I'm not sure I've resolved it entirely in my mind. What's your take on that?
Well, the one flesh union is this, that God is, he's the creator and designer of sex. He tells us where and when and how we're supposed to procreate. And that is, it's between one man, one woman, and the covenant union under him, in the context of that marital union for life. In the beginning, he created man and woman, that man should be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is later quoted by Jesus, and then again, Paul quotes Jesus, quoting Genesis intertextually. That one flesh union isn't supposed to be violated. Yeah. And when it comes to IVF, it's violated, 4 ways from Sunday. Here, we live in this strange world where you can have sex without marriage and kids without sex. And so you're taking the eggs outside of the woman, where not only a second and third and fourth party handling it, and then somebody's handling the man's sperm and bringing them together in a alien, foreign context. But now we're also outsourcing the protectiveness of the woman's womb, the protectiveness of the man's responsibility over his own children. It's a total violation of the one flesh union, and it's been something, actually, the Catholic theologians were the first to jump on this and point this out on this yesteryear, I think in the 1980s.
The other ethical issue I bring up from time to time, Josh, is that Exodus, I think it's chapter 22. God is very down on the idea of in any way oppressing an orphan, and arguing from the lesser, that is the oppressing the orphan, to the greater, in which you are intentionally creating an orphan, is itself apparently an abominable thing to God, because he says, if you do this kind of thing, I'm going to come and I'm going to destroy you. I don't have the verse in front of me, but in Exodus 22, he's not big on this oppressing orphan business. And the idea that you're going to intentionally create orphans, mass produce orphans, is another issue that kind of works in my craw. But I want to ask the bigger question here just for a moment as we wrap this thing up. Is there a deeper issue, underlying issues that came about by the development of IVF in 1978? Is there something bigger here? Something more root in terms of, problems with our society or our science today?
Well, it's funny. I think, I don't know who said it originally. It's like the church is almost 100 years behind responding to advances in technology when it comes to things like bioethics. And it seems like that's the case when you look at the first advances of pioneer pioneering technology and things that led to what led to IVF. With Walter Heap was the first pioneer in this, where he was artificially inseminating a rabbit. Did somebody know in the late 1800s where this was going to go? I highly doubt it. So why would the church have had a need to respond then? I think part of the underlying current that's leading to the major problem here with IVF is that we just live in a culture of death.
Yeah,
we devalue the value of life and the image of God. We devalue it's Satan, that he hates the image of God. He's going to do anything he can to attack it, and it's not just this front. When it comes to the transgender issue, he wants to tell boys that they're girls and girls that they're boys. It's an attack on the image of God. When it comes to abortion, he wants to it's the same thing. He wants to tell them that this child is going to ruin their life, right? So it's an attack on the image of God. It's the father of lies, ultimately playing through this worldview and expressing his attempt to express dominion through ideas, and he hates God. He hates the things of God, and he's going to do anything he can to assault and suppress the image of God post Genesis 3. And we see that played out in ideas and ideologies, and this is one of the latest expressions of that.
I think of the verse, the enemy has come to kill, to steal, and to destroy, but I've come to give life and to give it more abundantly. I mean, that pretty much summarizes what you just said. Put it in Jesus' words, right?
Yeah.
So
that's right. It roams about like a roaring lion. That's right. Yet King Jesus is putting his enemies under his feet.
That's right.
And we have the gospel, we have the word, and we need to unleash the word. That's
right.
what we need to do.
That's it. Well, friends, Joshua Holler has been my guest on this edition. Misconceiving IVF, an essential guide to the perils of in vitro fertilization. There's way more in the book than what we've covered today. He talks a great deal about infertility as well. So check it out at founderspress.org. That's the new book, Misconceiving IVF, founderspress.org. And they sell it there at their store. So pick up a copy. Certainly, let's educate ourselves on these things, friends. So important. Josh, thanks for joining me on Generations today. Appreciate you just sharing. It's been really informative.
Thank you, Brother Kevin. It's been a pleasure to be on with you today.
And friends, I just want to invite you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.